Okay. All right, Matthew Benner here from Action Karate. I am with Action Karate's recently named resident pediatric dietitian, Angel. Angel, say hi.
Hello.
And we're going to teach you guys and talk about today Secret Sugar Challenge. That's a challenge we're doing with our karate students, but whether you're an Action Karate member or just a friend or someone's watching this at home, this is a way for you. This is like a challenge you can do at home and a way for you to discover a secret, what you're actually eating in your food and secret sugars that are in your food and how to spot them when marketing companies try to cover it up with other words, with language, and surprising foods that have sugar that you would never, ever expect. So first, let me tell you a little bit of background about the challenge. So this is the Secret Sugar Challenge, and in the challenge, the goal is to find, for 3 days in a row, eat foods where sugar is not in the first 2 ingredients. That requires looking at ingredient labels and making sure sugar is not in the first 2 ingredients. Now, this does not include fruit, okay? Eating fresh fruit, awesome, okay? But fruit juice, that's gonna be a little bit different. Okay, unless it's fresh squeeze. You squeeze it yourself, like you squeeze an orange or put something in a smoothie, awesome, great. That does not count for this challenge. That's allowed. For this one, it's foods that have not from a fresh fruit. Now the goal of this is not to say that sugar is evil, sugar is bad. Sugar has actually, you know what? I'm not even gonna give my opinion. I'm gonna let you talk about it, Angel, because now you're the resident pediatric dietitian. So tell us, like, is sugar bad?
So I don't think that the word bad is really appropriate when you talk about anybody's diet, right? There's no foods that are good or bad or evil or whatever. Sugar has its place, but it has its place in moderation. Now, if you're somebody who has a medical condition where, sugar needs to be monitored or avoided, then that's a different story. But for the general population, some sugar is just fine. And it's good. It's one of these things in life that's delicious. Sugar does taste good. I'm going to admit it myself. But one of the qualities of sugar that makes it very appealing to manufacturers is that it's very, very addicting. So they have found ways to hide. Oh, sorry, the baby's crying. They found ways to hide it and hide it in foods, and also, manufacture it much cheaper. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to grab her.
Yeah, all good.
Sorry, everybody.
Play here. All right, cool. I think the baby heard that we were going to take away the sugar. And she said, "No, I want ice cream." So you were talking about kind of like good or bad, and how we shouldn't really think about food in such a binary way.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm absolutely of the mindset that there is a place for everything in everyone's diet. Of course, some things in more moderation than in others. But you don't want to totally, define foods as good or bad, because then you can develop other issues around it. So I don't want anyone to ever think about food having a negative connotation, because food is it can bring you so much joy in so many ways. So I would never want someone to not, to think sugar is bad for you. And then if you're having a slice of cake on someone's birthday, or you want to enjoy a soda, like you were saying, like once in a while, it's not bad for you. You know what I mean? It's the fruit of life, let's just say, is food. So you want to enjoy a variety of it. The one issue that I personally have with food manufacturers, which you guys have heard me say this now a couple of times since we've done these videos, is that their whole goal is to mass produce food that is addictive and very, very cheap. So they make a large, profit on it. So that's where my issue comes in. It's more with the manufacturers. So many people in the general public aren't trained to recognize some of the sort of code names and new ways, or new names and titles different types of sugars have. So it gets very, very confusing, and people end up maybe making choices that would be less healthy for them, thinking that it could be something better for them.
So what kind of ways, let's get into it. So what kind of ways so the goal of this is to be able to read an ingredient list, right? And know, okay, sugar's on the first 2 ingredients of whatever food it is. So what are some things that marketers or big food companies will use to kind of cover up, instead of putting the word sugar, like what else will they put in there?
So regular granulated sugar is actually pretty expensive. So it's an expensive ingredient. So a lot of times what they'll do is they will use high fructose corn syrup, which a lot of the people in the general public nowadays are aware that this is a highly processed form of sugar. It's not a naturally occurring form of sugar. So it's like I always call it like a lab made sugar. A scientist somewhere made
Mm-hmm.
that. So
Mm-hmm.
high corn syrup's a big one. Regular corn syrup is another big one. Um, you can use honey or agave. They're technically considered added sugars, even though they do
Mm-hmm.
have some medicinal qualities. They can, be considered an added sugar. And then they also use the chemical sugar names. So they can use fructose, glucose, galactose. Those are all sugars. Now, fructose is like a fruit sugar. So that's not necessarily the kind of sugar that would necessarily contribute to poor health, but an excessive amount of straight fructose without it being in a fruit could. So
Mm.
one of the big things when reading a label is when you look at the ingredient list, the first ingredient is the highest volume ingredient in the recipe for whatever food you're eating. So for example, if you're looking at a box of cereal and the first ingredient says high fructose corn syrup, that means there is more high fructose corn syrup in there than there is of anything else. And as you go down the ingredient list, it goes from highest to lowest. So a lot of times if you read ingredients of mass produced breakfast cereals, for example, the first ingredient is going to be high fructose corn syrup or corn syrup. And then one of the last ingredients would say whole grains, which is really should be opposite. That should be the first thing because it's
Right. So the first ingredient is the largest, and it goes all the way to the smallest amount, right? Is there anything that they like don't have to put in there? Like if it's like a small trace amount, like is that everything that's really in our food when you look at ingredients?
it's legally supposed to be. So
Got it.
the EPA and the FDA are really, really big sticklers about that. So they have to list every ingredient. There are certain things like flavors where they don't have to specify what the flavors are. So for example, in soda, if you look at soda, there's going to be a section of ingredients that just says natural and artificial flavors. And that's a very
Yeah.
ambiguous term for it could be anything. So
Right.
that's one of the things that they don't have to list. The other big thing on a food label that you can look at is now, well, it's not 100% official, but there was a very large push and there was a law that was passed about listing added sugars in a product. So a lot of these large scale food manufacturing companies, are required, well, all food labels are supposed to have it, in the next 5 years, but they're required to list added sugars. So a lot of your really, really big name food companies have already done this because it took years to prepare for them to do it. So they've already started doing it. So you'll see total sugars on the label, and then you'll see added sugars. And really added sugars are what you could sort of consider the more problematic sugars or the sugars that weren't naturally occurring. So in cheese, there's actually natural dairy sugars in cheese, but cheese shouldn't have sugar on top of it. So it shouldn't have added sugar. So in cereal, you would see like 45 grams of total sugar, and then there might say, 38 grams of added sugar, which means there's, I'm going to do the quick math. There's 7 grams. There's 7 naturally occurring in probably the grains or whatever the ingredients are, and then the rest of that sugar was added. So that would be in the form of high fructose corn syrup, table sugar, honey, whatever the case is. So really the added sugars is kind of a big glaring sign to tell you whether this is going to be more natural sugars or more added sugars.
Okay, interesting. So that's a great tip because honestly, I never really look at that, but so it's not required yet, but a lot of people already do it.
Yes. So the law got put into effect, I think maybe like in 2005, that by 2020, they were supposed to have done it. But then in 2020, because I think with COVID and everything, they pushed the deadline back 5 years to give companies a longer amount of time to to hit the goal.
Okay, cool. And then what type of foods might you find sugar in that like you wouldn't expect? Like that'd be surprising.
So honestly, at this point, it could be literally anything. Grocery stores are packed with foods that are not, they're in their natural state, right? So we were talking earlier, like there's a lot of added sugar in jarred pasta sauce. There's a lot of added sugar in some of the really well-known peanut butter brands, like, for example, Jif and Peter Pan are packed with sugar. Things like instant oatmeal, ready to make foods. So like frozen meals, a lot of times have added sugar in them. Yogurt has a ton of added sugar in it, especially kids yogurts. Let me think what else. Some breads have added sugar, like honey wheat, for example, is one of them, that would have added sugar in it. I mean, it could be like legitimately anything at this point.
What about, like, one of the things I've heard is like condiments. It's really common, like ketchup, honey mustard.
Yep.
Yeah, like that stuff is usually just straight high fructose corn syrup, right?
Yeah. So ketchup is a big one for kids because most kids love ketchup because it's an easy way to get them to eat something because it's literally covering it in sugar molecules. So it's, my son loves ketchup. I buy ketchup that's made with real sugar. So it's not made with high fructose corn syrup. So it's not as, as artificial as it could be. But really big ketchup manufacturers use high fructose corn syrup. Now I think Heinz sells both. Heinz sells like no added like natural sugar, and they also sell high fructose corn syrup. So it depends. Barbecue sauce is a big one. Barbecue sauce has a ton of added sugar in it, especially Sweet Baby Ray's. That's a really, really popular one. That's high fructose corn syrup. Honey mustard definitely does. Honey mustard runs the risk of having both honey and sugar added to it.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then
while you were saying that, I was like looking at some of the stuff I have. I have like this soyaki, like Trader Joe's stuff.
Yeah.
But it's like, soy sauce, the first ingredient, but the second ingredient is cane sugar. So, I mean, better than high fructose corn syrup, but
still sugar.
Still sugar, totally. Yeah, I'm listening. Oh, and oh my gosh, this is what my girlfriend loves, and let me see here. This is condensed milk. She's Hispanic, so they eat that a lot of their desserts.
Yes.
And this is the ingredients are milk and sugar.
Yep. That was one that actually got my old hospital was condensed milk. I did not realize how much sugar was in it.
Yeah, it's wild. And like, honestly, I tell her not to. Oh, look at this. Okay, here's an interesting one. All right, sweet corn.
Yep.
So would you expect that? Yeah. So, okay, so this is actually the third ingredient, but I'm going to argue that the second one, so the first one's corn, the second one is water, and the third one is sugar. So technically this would count?
No, it doesn't count.
Right.
I wouldn't count.
Well, because you're gonna strain the water.
Right.
Right? Like
I wouldn't count it.
Okay, fine.
They have to add it in there because it wasn't in the food in its original state.
Hold on. What about these snack crackers? Let's see about these. These are crackers. So it says enriched wheat flour. A bunch of words I can't even pronounce.
Probably preserve.
Yeah, vegetable shortening, salt and yeast, sorbitan, monosterate. I don't know what that is. Okay, this one I think we'd be okay with this one.
For the purposes of this challenge, I would say really the really big ones to kind of keep an eye on, because there are definitely some more scientific names for sugar that are going to be farther down on a label regardless, but you really want to look for sugar, cane sugar, high fructose corn syrup or corn syrup solids, and I would say also honey and agave.
Okay. What about something that says like sugar free? How should we navigate that one? Like a lot of labels will have, like this tomato sauce says, it doesn't say sugar free, it says no added sugar.
So no added sugar and sugar free are two different things. So no added sugar means that when they prepared that sauce, let's say, for example, there was no additional sugar added to it. So if you look on the back of that label, now doesn't look like a huge company that made that. It looks maybe like more of a smaller scale company. But it would, if it was like Ragu, let's say. Now Ragu has a boatload of added sugar, but in a perfect world, if they would have a no sugar added version, if you compared the labels, you could see the added sugars in the nutrition label. You would see a pretty big difference. You would see, like, I would say a no added sugar pasta sauce. Let's test the theory here. The no added sugar pasta sauce maybe would have 8 to 12 grams of sugar in it per serving, I'm going to guess.
This particular one it doesn't have added sugar, has like on the label, it just says regular sugars, and it's 3 grams.
Oh, it's really low. So there's really no added sugar in there. So that's great. But something like ragu, that's a pasta sauce that has a lot of added sugar. So you definitely would want to keep an eye on the difference between no added sugar and sugar-free is artificial sugar. So that's going to be like Sweet and Low or Splenda or one of those artificial sweeteners. A lot of these big companies, they also produce those artificial sweeteners, so they use those instead. So it gives consumers the idea that the food they're eating is better for them when it's really not, because they're just taking one from one and putting in the other, right? So it's going to reduce the
pick your poison.
Sure, right. But for the general public who doesn't have a health problem, they really don't need to be consuming artificial sugars either.
Cool.
So,
cool.
Yeah. So that is the difference.
Really
So no sugar added to it or sugar-free. Sugar-free could be anything. It's like the Wild West with sugar-free.
Well, all right, cool. Well, thank you so much for doing this and being on here. I know, even though I think I know a lot about this, you always say at least a couple things that I didn't know. So thank you for sharing with me. I'm sure people who are watching today, at least feel the same way, if not even like greater insight and value from this. So thank you so much for doing this, and I really appreciate it. If anyone has a comment and you're like, hey, I'm not sure about this food, or what about this name? Obviously, you can Google it to see if it's like most, I think, consumers online, especially on Reddit, will say, oh, that's just another word for sugar. But you can also ask us below, and we'll be happy to answer and check it out for you too. So thank you guys for watching, and catch you next time.
Bye.